welcome to another BGG Live. I'm Ashanti Golar. I'm the founder of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics. And today I am so thankful to have my friend, colleague, BGG contributor, Madalene Mielke, join us today to talk about a very important conversation, the rise of anti-Asian American violence that is happening in our country. And I first just personally want to thank Madalene for joining us, because I know this is a lot of emotional energy, emotional labor, and I appreciate you just taking the time during a difficult time to speak with all of us. So welcome.
Thank you, Ashanti, and I appreciate you and our friendship through the years, and you giving me the space to talk with you and your audience.
So where I want to start is, unfortunately, for a lot of people, they think that the anti-Asian violence sentiment is new in the United States, and it's actually not. So can you first start off by just telling us a little bit about the history of just violence, racism, xenophobia that the Asian American community has experienced in the country?
Yes, absolutely. So, looking back, even in the 1800s, when we had the first Chinese folks come to the U.S. to build the railroad that extends from the East Coast to the West Coast, that's in the mid 1800s, 1870s, 80s. There was a Chinese Exclusion Act that happened, which allowed the U.S. government to say no Chinese in this country. And they came in for cheap labor, and this in itself, in regards to the Chinese women who would sometimes immigrate over, they didn't want to include Chinese women in this immigration. So in 1875, which was actually one of the very first anti-immigrant acts to exist, excluded exclusively Chinese women because they thought they were had immorals. And so we're talking about they were thinking that they were going to be prostitutes and multiply the Chinese population. So there are many instances of targeted discrimination against the Asian American community. You can look at the Japanese incarceration of the internment camps that happened during World War II. Even the most recent things that have happened with in the 80s with Vincent Chin, when people were blaming the Japanese for the automobile industry downturn. So there's so many things that have been a part of this history of the United States that includes Asian Americans in a way that's been specifically targeted against us. Even when you think about 9/11. So, I think that these are all things that happen because people are specifically looking at Asians and saying, we don't want you here.
And we know we're entering the second year of the pandemic. We're in the second year of the pandemic. But when it first started hitting, more information was coming out. I was actually in San Francisco. I was staying in Chinatown. I love Chinatown in San Francisco. But even though it was so empty because no one wanted to be in Chinatown because of the heated rhetoric that started from the beginning with COVID and anti-Chinese sentiment, anti-Asian, and we have just continued to see it escalate with more hate crimes. So can you talk to us a little bit about this escalation and particularly the violence that we're seeing against Asian American women?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, pre-pandemic, which was the 1 year anniversary on March 11th. Prior to that, people were still frequenting businesses because they weren't under quarantine or work from home or lockdown. And at that time period, those Asian American owned small businesses, restaurants were no longer being frequented, and so they were feeling the brunt of it before anyone else was when they started the lockdown. So as time went by, select elected leaders decided to use racial slurs to call COVID instead of its official. That in itself, I think, allowed people to say that it's okay to blame a certain race and constituency for this pandemic. And it has resulted in people, randomly being attacked on the streets, walking home, going to the grocery store, our most vulnerable communities, the elderly being harassed and beaten, their deaths. In particular, we've had 150% increase in acts of racial hate. And so this is alarming, because when you look at the reports, which is 3,000 plus, you're talking about 68% of them coming from women who are reporting being targeted. And we also know that there is underreporting in all of this. And it's so important to recognize that, we don't want anyone from any community, any constituency, to ever feel that they are unsafe to walk in their neighborhood or to walk outside of their neighborhood. And a lot of times this is also happening in Chinatowns, where you anticipate, oh, I'm safe, I'm around other people who look like me, and that's not the case. And so Asian American women also, because they've also experienced a great deal in this past quarter in the pandemic, the jobs market saw that the loss of jobs all came from women, and the highest percentage was from Asian American women. And so you're talking about people who are in low-income jobs, who are unfortunately in positions that are vulnerable and trying to just get to work and are unable to do so. And this is an important thing to remember as we think about how we move forward.
And as we're moving forward, what are some ways that we can stand in solidarity with the Asian American community during this time?
Well, tomorrow is actually a virtual day of action. And so tomorrow we hope that people will support us in solidarity. We have a website that actually is where people can learn more. It's an American Day of Action. And this is where people can, Asian American Day of Action, this is where people can log on, get a toolkit, see if they want to sign up, to say that they support the community. It also offers, there's also a vigil at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time to honor the individuals who were killed in Atlanta. I think all of this can be found on the website for you to stand in solidarity. I think after tomorrow, I think what's important also is to look at ways that you can, support our community groups. It's, as I mentioned, because the majority of the, people affected in these targeted acts of hate have been women. I would highly encourage people to look at my colleagues who work at the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. They have a lot of material about how you can support them in their work in uplifting Asian American women. My colleagues also at the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, whether you want to take a look at the DC office or the Atlanta chapter, they're also very much a part of the everyday work of advocating for Asian Americans and public policy that benefits all of our communities. And I think one of the things that most people don't know really about the Asian American community is our history. So, a little bit of the things that I talked about earlier today in the beginning of this broadcast, you can learn more because PBS also did a series, a 5-part series to talk about the Asian American experience. Definitely is not a full encompassing show. However, it does do a lot in terms of making sure that we are giving you some of the highlights, the points of how we came to this country, the different groups and constituencies that compose the Asian American community. We are not a monolith. And so being able to understand that there are many different cultural languages, all of the things that come about having different heritage in the Asian American community is there for you to learn a little bit more about our experience and what it feels like to be an Asian American.
And I appreciate everything that you do as President CEO of APAICS, which is the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And of course, I have to have you talk a little bit about that and the work that you do and how we can support you and APAICS as you continue to do this work.
Well, thank you very much. And APAICS, we are here to increase API representation at across the political levels, all political levels, from community advocate to elected office. It's our work to really make sure that we have Asian American representation in the halls of Congress, whether as staff or elected leaders. We also pay our interns and fellows so that we can help to diversify Congress. So I'm really proud of the number of people who continue in public service because they've gone through our program. And then we also have a leadership training that allows us to help local leaders run for office wherever they're from. And that to us is important because it's a pipeline for us to see the growth of the caucus. And we hope that people will take a look at our work because it's important for us to notice that it's not just based in DC in the sense of, the congressional members. It's also all the people who are running for city council, for state ledge, and in that we definitely want to see an increase in API women. So I created the Women's Collective to make sure that there was a support network for the API women who want to be in public service. And as it's Women's History Month, being sure to celebrate those individuals. And in May, when it's our Heritage Month, celebrating all the trailblazers who have worked to get us to where we are today.
Madalene, thank you so much for joining us today and imparting your wisdom and how we can stand in solidarity with the Asian American community. Everyone, I hope you will participate in tomorrow's Day of Action. I know I will be, and please make sure that you share this interview with other people. And I hope everyone has a really good evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.